4 in the state.
And long story short.
All right. Well, we'd like to welcome those that are here in person to our September 22nd meeting of the Kaysville Planning Commission. I'd also like to welcome anybody that's online that's joining us that way. We'll begin our meeting with an approval of the minutes from the September 8th Planning Commission meeting. Do we have any discussion that needs to happen before we get into the approval?
I have a motion I suppose I'll propose, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
So I read through the minutes, and I think it, as most minutes do, it largely captures what was said, but, I think there are some things that might be said that don't make it into the written minutes. And because we have the YouTube version, which is obviously video and audio, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes, and I believe this is allowed in state statute, based on my quick reading of it, 54-4-203. I believe this is allowed there, but what I'm going to propose, my motion is we approve them, but to the extent there are, details in the audio, the actual words that were said, that the audio, the recording would control, if that makes sense. So if the written minutes are not adequate or fully fleshed out what was said, then the verbal actual audio recording is what controls any question.
How do you second that? But I'll second that.
Were you referring to the code section on, or the statute on open and public meetings?
Yeah, so specifically, if you want me to clarify, so 52-4-203, 52-4 is the Open and Public Meetings Act. Section 203 talks about written minutes of open meetings, which our last meeting was, just like this one is. And it talks about written minutes and the recording of meetings, and state, the first paragraph 1 in that section requires both written and an audio recording. Yep, just at the top, right there. Written minutes and a recording shall be kept of all open meetings. And then 2 says what the written meeting minutes have to include. And then if you go to 3, actually, let's see, go back up, sorry. Here, I'll show you, or let me find it here first. Okay, so paragraph 2B is what I'm talking about. And I'm not sure this fits exactly, but I think that the essence of this paragraph that's highlighted that I read is that we can satisfy the requirements of paragraph A, little I3 and VI, so paragraph 2A3 and 2A4, we can satisfy those requirements by providing an online link to an actual recording. So I think state law already might allow for what I'm saying. I'm just trying to be clear that the audio recording be essentially incorporated into our written minutes.
So essentially you're saying, like, maybe down at the very bottom of the minutes, we provide a link to, like, the YouTube video
Because there may be more detail.
that would then give any clarity should somebody have questions? Is that kind of what you're thinking this means?
Well, this is going way more in depth than I intended or hoped, but this is good. Here's my concern. So if the written minutes say, as they will do, a summary of what was any one of us said, and it's, let's say, 2 or 3 sentences. But somebody who's relying on the minutes, whether that's a citizen or some other administrative body or a judge or something, they want to know a little more detail, and that detail might weigh in favor of one side or the other. And so you go to the audio recording. What I don't want to have happen is somebody to say, well, the audio recording, that's not the official record of the meeting. To me, the audio recording is more important. What was actually said, not what somebody summarized in the words. The summary shouldn't control. What was actually said and can be discerned through the audio is what needs to control in terms of the substance of the meeting. And I'm just trying to say, let's make sure that that is the case. So maybe we can, I don't know if we can procedurally, I'll just start over and say, that's my motion.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can make it very concise. My motion is the meeting minutes be approved with the audio recording and video that's on YouTube. And it doesn't, in my mind, doesn't have to be officially linked to the written meeting minutes because they can be available, they can be found online. The audio recording is what controls and is sort of the actual governing meeting minutes for last 2 weeks ago meeting.
Isn't that already there? Isn't that
Yeah.
under 567? Any other information that is a record of the proceedings of the meeting? That any member request to be entered into the minutes or recording? Yeah, already? No.
The way I read that is if a citizen comes up or an applicant is here and they say, hey, I brought 3 pictures that I want each one of you to look at. I want to enter that into the record and make that a part of the record. I think that's what that is saying.
The staff report is a record, yes. If the planning commission accepted something from the public or from, right, like the applicant submits a PowerPoint presentation that's used in the meeting, that would be considered part of the record. I mean, I'm still trying to.
A video wouldn't be considered part of the records.
Let me just. So I mean, I think what I was saying then captures, Commissioner Sunloff, what you are intending, which means, okay, so in the minutes, we provide a link to the meeting recording. And we haven't traditionally done that, but that, I think, captures what you're intending. And that we include that link, and then because that link is in the minutes, it becomes part of the official record.
I mean, I think the link helps, but I just.
So in my experience, like, what matters, and I've gone, I'm just gonna say rounds with people over the years, whether it's been a citizen or an elected official or someone who comes in and says, well, this is what the minutes say, or this is what the discussion says. And at the end, even that doesn't matter. What matters is the motion and the vote and what was contained in the motion. So the discussion leads up to that, but in many ways, all of that discussion is irrelevant because it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't really drive what happens with the action of the item. Right, like you can have all the discussion that leads you to think that a motion will be made and a decision will be made based on that discussion, but then somebody makes a motion, the vote goes, it falls a different way. And so, you know, I mean, happy to try and accommodate your motion and the request. I'm just having a hard time figuring out exactly what that is and how we do that.
Well, in my mind, my motion needs no action from staff. I'm just saying, it can literally be exactly as it is. But if, and I mean, let's just be clear, there is a strong likelihood that these meeting minutes are going to be analyzed from last meeting. We'll just put it simply like that. I'm saying whoever is doing the analyzing need not be bound by the summary written record. I want them to be bound by the full record, which is represented in the audio and video recording. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. And so, like I say, I don't know that it needs to anything, that staff needs to do anything. It's just, that's my motion, and if the commission agrees with me, then great. If not, then I totally recognize that that's the commission's prerogative.
I think it would be good for us to have some discussion before we actually vote. I mean, I guess one of the concerns I would have is that it sounds like you're trying to call into question the legal record of the, and if that's the case, then why don't you just amend, like make a proposal to amend the minutes according to how you think that maybe there's deficient. So that would be my concern. Because I mean, what you're saying is basically saying that you're trying to say that the audio recording should be the legal record. And I don't think that's what if you read the law, I don't think that's what it's saying here. That's the minute should be the legal record. And so if we disagree with the legal record, then we should amend it so that it reflects what was said during the meeting.
I mean,
Yeah, and I think that's a valid comment. To do that, in my mind, I think might be administratively burdensome. And I'm not trying to add to the administrative burden with staff, so I'm just trying to say, let's not have to make us go back and add every nook and cranny. But, you know, this is not a hill I'm wanting to die on. So if this, like I said, has taken 12 minutes or whatever longer than I wanted it to, if there's not, you know, a consensus, then maybe Commissioner Doxey can withdraw his second and it can just die. But that was just my concern, is maybe the written record isn't fully representative of everything that was said, and so let's just make it easy and say incorporate the audio version.
It was a good discussion last time, so there was a lot of details that we talked about that I think could be helpful if someone wanted to refer to it.
So could we just, the member request to be entered into the minutes, the audio and visual recording from last week? Make a motion that be considered with the records, and we go from there?
That was more concisely put than me, and better put, so yeah.
Let's go with it. I second that. Oh, didn't he make a motion?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think we'd probably
I
need
just
to.
rephrased your motion. Okay, I would like to make a motion.
Well, just a second, we have a motion before. We got to take care of the first motion first.
Oh, yes, the first motion.
So do you want to withdraw?
I'll withdraw my second because Josh got a little too complicated.
Okay, so.
Surprise, surprise.
The first motion fails without a lack of a second, so.
I want to second the first motion. It
Okay.
completely makes sense to me. And I clearly understand the differentiation between what was summarized versus the actual verbalization of the conversation that may make a difference in terms of outcomes of people that might be reading it or listening to it. I think that the minutes were captured well at large, But if people, if there might be those that are interested in seeking out additional details, without making it more burdensome to staff, I think the minutes online by far should take precedence and should be able to best clarify the actual conversation versus the summarization.
I think we're saying the same thing.
I think it would be good for us to clarify what we're voting on.
Yeah, I'm still not clear on the intent of the motion, but, so the motion is then to have the minutes plus the audio and the YouTube recording be considered the minutes or the official record?
I guess given that it was my motion, I have to clarify. Practically speaking, this is what I want to accomplish. This is what I want the motion to accomplish. Somebody sits down and says, what happened at that meeting? What did the commissioners discuss? Let's pull out the meeting minutes. And they see a commissioner, a 2-line summary of what a commissioner said. And they're like, I wonder if that's what they really said. Let's go to the YouTube recording and listen. And that 2-sentence summary turns into 5 minutes that was more fully fleshed out. And there's something in there that this person wants to use for their purposes of appeal or whatever in this instance. What I'm saying is let's allow them to use what was fully fleshed out in the audio. And my motion is trying to accomplish that by saying the audio is incorporated into the meeting minutes and can be used, the full statements of whatever was said can be used from the audio and not have to be bound by the strictures of the written record. I don't know if that helps or complicates things, but that's what I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay. I guess we have an explanation of or clarification on the motion, and we have a second. So we'll start the voting with, I think it would be good to do this, have a roll call here. We'll start with Commissioner Sundloff.
Aye.
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 But let's not make this a practice. Can we call this an exception?
It has been, and I think will continue to be an exception, yes.
Okay.
It's the first time I can
That was
remember
a good
doing it.
discussion. I do agree with that.
Okay. So the motion passes to approve the minutes with the amendment, or according to the Commissioner Sundloff's motion. So we'll go on to the public hearing now for text amendment for KCC 17-13-4, R-D Diverse Residential District Conditional Uses. And we'll go turn the time to the staff to give their report.
Well, I wish every text amendment could be delivered this quickly and efficiently. This is intended to fix the confusion that we had at our last meeting based on that first paragraph in the RD zone 1713-4, which talks about conditional uses. And I don't believe the intent of this language was to continue to allow multiple family dwellings. However, it's very poorly written, confusing. So I think the remedy here is to just remove that paragraph in its entirety, and it won't be a question from here on out. So there's still item number 6 down there, which would then become number 5, but that would, twin homes would still be allowed if they could meet the conditions required in 1728. So there would still be, as with all of our other single-family zones, an opportunity for twin homes. That's really pretty straightforward.
Okay. Any questions for the staff? Okay, we'll move on to opening the public hearing. So if anybody, members of the public that would like to come forward, this would be your time to do so. If you do, please come up to the podium and state your name and your address if you'd like to comment on this, this hearing.
My name is Laureen Starkey. My address is 573 South, 350 East, Kaysville, Utah. And I'm curious, I'm just trying to get my head around what the RD is. I'm wondering if someone could explain that to me, please. Because we tried to read it and I tried to understand what the RD and what they're taking off. And I'm just wondering, is that possible for someone to explain in lay language what we're doing so that we understand what's being amended?
Well, it looks like to us, like, I mean, when I read it, there is no amendment. It's actually just striking out the first paragraph.
Which basically talks about the multiple dwellings, and it says no, you can't have multiple dwellings, only the twin homes. Is that what you're telling me? Is that what I'm trying to understand it? I'm sorry.
At least, I think I mean, your interpretation of this was that since these multiple dwellings were mentioned in the conditional use PRIT, that would be strange not to allow them as a conditional use. So that's, by taking them out, then you wouldn't allow these types of dwellings as a conditional use in this zone.
So is it being taken out? That's my question, or is it not?
Yeah, that's why it's stricken out, like you have red lines. That paragraph is being stricken.
So it is not allowed for the conditional use, is that correct?
That's why it's being removed.
That's all I need. Thank you so much.
Any other people would like to comment? Okay, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners, any other discussion that we'd like to have on this proposed change?
I think this is what was originally intended. They probably shouldn't have even put it in there. It was, I think, originally intended. I think Melinda mentioned this, I think, at the last meeting. I think what was, at least my impression of what Melinda said was, I think it was intended that any multiple dwellings that existed when this passed were to just become legal non-conforming. Or just non-conforming uses. And no other future would be allowed. That was my impression. And if that wasn't what was said, that's how I interpret it. And so this just accomplishes that very clearly, just delete it out entirely. There are multiple dwellings that exist in the RD, but no other ones will be permitted, or either permitted uses or conditional uses.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. My motion is that we approve the text amendment to 17-13-4 diverse residential district conditional uses as proposed by staff.
Okay, so we have a motion to recommend approval by Commissioner Branch.
I'll second.
And we have a second from Commissioner Lyons. We will start the voting with Commissioner Keach.
Aye.
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 Okay, the motion passes unanimously. We now have a discussion of the 2022 general plan to include moderate income housing element based on the state code 17-27A-4032. So, do you have a report for us on that?
All right, well, I did let the state know yesterday that we were not gonna have our general plan in compliance by the October 1st deadline, but I also let them know that we were working towards that. So, the reports are due, we're supposed to be in compliance by October 1st, and, when we get into compliance, then we'll send the report or submit the report at that time. They will likely send us a friendly letter telling us that we're not in compliance and give us 90 days to get there. But they do know we're working on it, and they know that we just recently adopted the general plan. And so that said, I have been spending some time really trying to understand this and to understand the changes in reporting and what the state is really wanting to see. And so that'll, I think, be kind of a work in progress. But we talked about this, I think, 2 meetings ago. So last time we talked about this was in August. And at that point, the commission requested that we go back and look at the elements that were included in the 2019 plan and maybe use that as a starting point. And one thing, actually, I did want to say to, specifically to Commissioner Sunloff, I need to apologize because I think I was pretty dismissive of some of your, you're like, this one. And some of the ones that you had thought would be good to implement, had, I think, some financial associations with them. But really, what I want to say with that is just that this is your recommendation to make to the city council. And so if, as a group, you feel like those are the conditions that you would like to recommend to the city council, I fully support that, and that's what we will take to them. How I see this working, hopefully we can come to some consensus tonight on at least 3 to recommend to the city council. If we want priority status on applications, we need to have 5 elements incorporated into our general plan. There's been a lot of questions about, well, what application or funding applications would we not be eligible for? The answer to that is any state funding that comes through UDOT or Wasatch Front, which is a lot. I've also had people ask, do we care? And I think we should care about being compliant with state statute. I think that's something that the Planning Commission wants to do. But the end, we'll take our recommendation of the City Council, and my guess is that we'll end up being compliant by the end of the year. But really, this is your discussion to have to see which ones you feel like would be good for Kaysville and ones that you feel like we could accomplish. As far as the reporting and what's due this year, what they're really doing with the reporting this year is establishing a baseline. So the questions that they're asking is, have you adopted a moderate income housing element in the plan? Select the strategies, it's a drop-down list. When did the municipality last adopt or amend the MIH? Provide the link to the ordinance, provide the link to the general plan, what page? Anyway, so it's very basic. But what they'll do next year is they will say, okay, now you've had all of these in place for a year. Did you accomplish those goals? And so if we select one, and let's say one of those is one that Commissioner Sunloff mentioned at the meeting we last discussed this, which is look to the general fund to find resources to help assist with this. Well, did we implement any programs? Did we look in the general fund? Did we include anything in our budget? I mean, those would be the things that we would have to go then and then prove to the state, yes, this was what we selected and here's what we've done. They also are asking us to include in these plans a reasonable timeline to accomplish some of these goals. So hopefully that gives you as a commission just a little bit more context as to what the state's looking for. I know I've mentioned in the past that I think, we were required to amend our general plans and have something in place in 2019. We did that, and the state had at that time reporting that just really didn't make sense. And so at least Steve's chuckling. It didn't.
It made no sense.
It made
And
no sense.
You just simply reported it, and it was a report that went in, and there were counties that it didn't matter in, but you still had a report. And cities where they were already meeting it were like, why are we even reporting on this?
Yeah. So this then I think is going to be a more personalized report. It's going to be tailored to, here's the items you selected, now show us what you've done. So that being said, I did a couple things, and I apologize, it's so small. But if you recall too from our discussion in August, a lot of the options that had been included in previous versions of the state statute had been reworded, or they had been, they had had other provisions added in. And so in your packet, I did include kind of like a red line version of the ones we had selected and how those had changed. And then what this matrix is essentially on the left-hand column, those are the 5 that we had in the 2019 plan that were the equivalent of the options now available to us in the 2022 code that was passed this year. I also went through and looked at the ones that just simply didn't make sense for Kaysville, or that wouldn't be relevant to Kaysville. As an example, item Q, we're not going to have a transit reinvestment zone in Kaysville, so
Dang it.
we shouldn't select that one.
We're not getting BRT?
We won't have BRT for a while, will we? Will there be BRT on
It'll be
Main Street?
BRT if it ever comes here. It won't
Okay,
be
yeah.
tracks.
So perhaps in the distant future, when BRT comes through on Main Street, that's one that we could incorporate into our general plan. But so that it leaves us with, some limited options that,
But even if we, and sorry to interject, but even if we adopted Q now, you still could look long-term and create some TOD, or transit-oriented development around those areas. I mean, there's ways to do that now, looking forward. I mean, North Salt Lake's done that very effectively on their Main Street corridor. Highway 89, they're putting all their high-density housing on that corridor now in anticipation of the bus rapid transit coming.
they probably already have the bus rapid transit
They didn't have
route
it, they didn't have
selected.
it, they didn't have it then, but the corridor was selected because of where they had put their housing. So I think sometimes you're developing a market, sometimes you're chasing a market. In that way, they developed the market for that. I mean, because they already had 89 there, but when transit came in, they knew that's where the housing was, and it was going to be in the future, and that's what the city was developing towards and is currently developing towards. So I think there's ways as a city in future planning to do that.
Fair point. I think the state would look us funny, though, if we selected that one.
Well, and the other one that you think is the Layton bus trolley. Do we participate with the bus trolley and then create some zones where that bus trolley, do we go in a cooperative agreement and then create some zones where we then have transit that can then pick up housing, so then we're then able to take residents who maybe want to get to transit easier, and then we participate in a program like that. So there's ways to facilitate it if we plan towards it and participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at this, opening minds everywhere. Commissioner Lyon.
Melinda, in terms of accountability, when you said you set forth goals and the state will come back to basically ask if you achieved them, what's the timeline on that? Do they typically like check in, or what does that look like?
So the reporting will be due on October 1st of every year. And then their intent is to take the next 90 days or whatever to review all the reporting that's submitted and verify that the commitments we've made with the items that we've selected, that those have been followed through with. So when I talked with the individual the state hired, who's now leaving,
Bill's leaving?
yes,
Oh, jeez.
yes.
That's the third one in a year.
So his response was, you know, like if we selected rezone for densities, and then we didn't rezone, you know, he's saying don't select that one. So I think, right, like some of this is, we'd have to somehow reasonably anticipate when some of these rezones would come through and think, you know, will this even work? Will this help increase our moderate income housing in the community? Will it not? Right, because we don't have control or say over when people submit applications to us. But my thoughts on this are, so as an example, because we now have, I think, a very good general plan, best one probably we've ever had in the history of Kaysville. And it defines things. It defines our city center. It defines where we want to have mixed use zones. It defines where we want to have RM. And so if a rezone came through and it was in an area that was slated to be mixed use and they applied for a mixed use zone and that was denied, I think that would be one that the state would come back and say, well, why was it denied? Now, there's a variety of reasons why it could be denied, right? It could be, it could be any number of things. And so I don't know how far we would have to go to defend these things, but I think essentially as long as it makes sense and it's what's going to align with our general plan and we put that type of a element into our general plan, then the expectation is that we're going to fulfill that obligation. I think that was a long answer to try and get your question, Commissioner Keach, but so again, there were several that I just felt like we should eliminate based on the practicality of accomplishing them, right? I mean, Commissioner Lyon has some great ideas. How practical is that in the next 5 years is really what they're wanting us to look at. That's probably more of a 10-year type of a goal to start pulling in and trying to look at transit like that. So I think we should look at those shorter term things that we could accomplish. You know, there was the addition of some of the language of like, okay, preserve your existing moderate income housing stock. And then that turned into, but now you have to implement a good landlord program, which is something that would be a great thing, I think, in a community that has a lot of rentals. Honestly, Kaysville doesn't have a lot of apartments. It doesn't have a lot of rentals. In fact, I was just looking at numbers and it's 87% of our housing stock is owner occupied. So, you know, for 13% of our housing stock, is that really what we would want to try and channel those efforts?
How many units does that translate into?
What was that?
How many units does that translate into?
It's about 1,200. I just was looking, if I've done all the math correct, I just was looking at this on the census website. So I was writing notes, but it's about 79, well, I was looking at more current numbers. No. Here's what I was, so, okay, so the 2020 data says that there's 9,175 housing units in Kaysville. And they estimate that 86.8% are owner occupied. So that turns into 7,964 owner occupied, and then 1,211 that would be renter occupied. So that would also include, they don't differentiate in this statistic between mobile home, twin home, multifamily, so that would be all of the housing units in total. So, you know, if we, like, we don't really have any big apartment complexes here. You know, like, we don't have any 200-unit apartment complexes. We have maybe a couple that are 20, as far as I know, but, right. So, again, my whole point is, like, if we're only talking about 13% of the housing stock, would that be a big bang for our buck? And I think the answer to that is no, especially because we just don't have the staff to create a whole program and ensure there's a good rent, you know, landlord program. It's certainly something that we could do if that was what the commission felt like we should do. But I think there's a lot of other communities that would make a lot more sense to implement that versus our community. So next, I mean, just real quickly, this is what we had in the 2019 plan. So there were 9 that were selected, and then going back to other questions that have been asked, and this was asked, I think, in relation to, well, it was at the city council meeting, but in relation to, you know, is there a state mandate that we should have so many moderate income housing units in Kaysville? And the state doesn't have a formula that says each community should have 8% of their housing stock, blah, blah, blah. What they want us to do is look at how many housing units we have, look at what our median income is, and how much of our population falls within each of those demographics, right? So how many that are at 100% or over of the median income, and then how many are between 180. And based on that, they're asking us to do the calculation then, okay, so we have 3% of Kaysville, 3.2% of people in Kaysville live in poverty. So I just pulled that off the Census Bureau today as well. So if 10% of our population was at that 80% or below, then, and our calculations showed that we only had enough housing units to house 50% of them, then we would essentially demonstrate to the state that we have a deficiency of 50% of the need. And then you translate that to how many housing units were deficient, and that's where that calculation would come from. So, I'm gonna have to clone myself to get all of this figured out, but, so going back to the 2019 plan that just said, you know, roughly 15%, my guess is that that staff came up with that language on their own based on whatever data they looked at, and it said, you know, like 15% of our additional housing needs to come in at moderate income so that we start meeting this. I haven't done the math yet on what that would be for us, but my guess is it's not changed much since 2019, and so if it was correctly calculated in 2019, we're still probably at that same deficiency I think the state also knows and understands that to a certain extent, right, like a community such as Kaysville, where we have so much of our land that's already been developed, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for us to make up that 15%. You know, so, and it's not something that we could do quickly. Other communities may be able to, if they had a deficiency of 15%, you know, 3 housing projects go in and they could make that up. But that's just not what our land availability is. And I think that's part of the reason why they're trying to revamp the reporting and what we report and have it based on what we select versus just this unilateral. So they're making some efforts to kind of know and understand that each community is different. So that said, the 3 items that I feel like are worth recommending, and they're similar, or some of the same ones that we had before, but items A, E, and F. And then, again, we need to have 3. If the commission wants to recommend 5, we can go that route. To have 3 will meet state code requirements. We just wouldn't have any type of a priority level for any of that funding that we would apply for. As an example, we spent the last couple of years working on our Main Street revitalization and kind of visioning what we would like to see happen through there. It's $2.5 million. We would like to apply for transit funding, or not transit, but transportation funding through Wasatch Front and through UDOT to fund the changes, the pedestrian enhancements, the beautification we'd like to see over there. If we have only 3 selected, then we're eligible to apply. But if we're the only one of the 20 that apply that only has 3 and the other 19 have 5 elements, then we get put down at the bottom of the pile. And does that matter? I think it does, but you know, again, the goal is to get into compliance with state code, so we should choose a minimum of 3. And then I do have on the other slides, if you want to go in and look at each item, I have all of those A through X on a slide that I can scroll through and we can go back and discuss those. But these are the 3 that I would recommend. I did include in the staff report as well. There were, I think, 3 or 4 others that I thought would be feasible for us based on the staffing that we have. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. And I'll try and answer any questions, but this really is kind of, you know, your role as a planning commission, and part of what's outlined in state statute, you know, is like you're really supposed to be kind of like the planning arm of the community. And so this is one of the opportunities that I think you'll really have. I mean, you were very involved in the general plan process as well, but this is be a great opportunity for the planning commission to really kind of be forward thinking and select these elements based on what you feel like fits and works for Kaysville. And so this is kind of, I think, probably one of the most fun opportunities you have as a commission, rather than just hearing conditional use permits about how many farm animals people can have, so.
So I don't know if you, I can't remember if you mentioned this, but so that you've given us our recommendations. When would we, assuming that we kind of agreed in this in principle, when would we like vote on this?
So that's a good question. And then, so my thought was if we can select the items that you want to include, then what I would do is is I would have to go back and draft that. And so the state's asking us that we have a bunch of information, but an implementation plan, goals and strategies that would be associated with each of these. And so once I know what these elements are, then I can go in and draft that language and bring that back. We'll have to have a public hearing scheduled. And if the stars align, we do have a 5th Thursday this month. I could maybe get that done for the first meeting in October, but I don't want to fully commit to that, just because it could end up, being quite a bit of writing. But, so either the 13th, we would have a public hearing then on either the 13th or the 27th of October is what I would hope for. And then take that to the city council in November. And also what I would do is just, for the sake of being, I think, expeditious, I would bring just that element of the plan, meaning I wouldn't go through it, and I haven't actually reformatted in its entirety the general plan that we adopted in August. Like I didn't fold all of the appendices into it and everything because I knew we were going to be modifying it. So I would bring the portion that I would want to fold into the plan, and then once it's approved, then I would go in and plug it in. We'll put it in, I think, chapter 3 at the end, and then we'll have to go in and like reformat and renumber everything, but it would just be added in. But I would bring it to you as a standalone portion and not inclusive with the entire 90 pages that we have. So that way, if there are any changes, either at this level or at the city council level, we haven't lost a lot of work with trying to reformat everything in the existing general plan.
I think it would make sense just to do the 3. I don't know what the rest of the commission feels like that, but it's like if we would be serious about the 3 that we choose, that would be the best way to go proceed, and it gives us the best chance of, actually accomplishing something. So, but I'm open for debate on that, though, if other people feel otherwise.
Are you recommending just to do 3 rather than 5? Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For cities that have 5 and they hit their targets, they're going to be on the top of the list for potential grants or other things, right? There's an incentive for that, it sounds like.
So there is, and I'll tell you that I don't think the state, and by the state I mean UDOT, I don't think they've really come out and said, here's how we're going to rank these, or how we're going to toss out the ones that aren't in compliance. And so I don't know, there's not really good answer to that, other than they are saying, look, you'll get bonus points on your applications if you have more than 2. So I don't know how many communities are gonna go add a couple more.
Hedging your bets, right?
Yeah,
My guess is they're going to do 3.
you think most would do 3?
Yeah, knowing how busy the job is and knowing how things look, you're not going to, most cities are like our city. You have a staff that works hard, does a good job, and wants to be in compliance, but you're not, you can only do so much. I think that's the compliance issue. And I think, do we really want to overburden ourselves and the city staff with more than what's required. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. I think I'm not appreciative of this carrot and stick approach. I've been working, I mean, I work with planning commissions and city staffs all over the country, and state of Washington has approved a really robust affordable housing plan, but it is more reflexive, it's more flexible, and it actually incentivizes the cities to do this through offering grants than offering penalties. And I think the way this is working is the wrong approach. And I mean, they put like $22 billion into affordable housing this last go-around, with another tranche coming for 2023. And it's actually working up there, because you have cities that are saying to themselves, yeah, we have to put the elements in the general plan, and their general plans are prescriptive, they're not just advisory. But it's working because now the cities are having to plan towards it. But it works because now they want to incentivize versus this approach, which says to the cities, now you're penalized. So they actually want to work with a developer versus on the other side of it, where I don't think this approach is going to work as well. I think we do the minimum, and I think my reasoning is that I don't want to overburden staff more than we have to, because I think that's a cost on us as taxpayers. It's a hidden cost we don't often see, but it's more of a cost. Are we going to have to hire a new staff member to run this program? I mean, that's at a cost. I mean, that's $100,000, a couple $100,000 in benefits and everything. I don't think we want to go down that road, but I think we're going to have to go down that road with the minimum of 3. I think we're going to have to be prudent in the way we do it. I mean, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to help give a little bit of perspective to the commission, especially we have a couple newer commissioners. Although I don't know if this has been discussed with any of you, but, you know, item J from the list, let me just go to that. So implement zoning incentives for moderate income housing units in new developments. So that's something that we could do. And those zoning incentives that I would envision, right, so now we're talking about doing a code amendment. And so we would say, look, right now our multifamily, we only allow 1 unit for every 2,800 square feet. Now, we would be willing to, if you would commit to doing so many as moderate income housing units, we'll bump up your density allowance. So now let's say if you provide 10% units at moderate income housing levels, then you can do 1 multifamily unit for every 2,000 square feet. So those are the types of, you know, zoning incentives that you would look at incorporating into current code to meet this element.
So you're talking like a density bonus?
Yeah, some type of a density bonus, but you only get that if
you meet the permits.
if you're committing.
What if they bring LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit? Would you do it then also? So let's say they're.
You could,
Okay.
but, I mean, it was interesting, so, probably about a month ago, there was a regional conversation with elected officials, city council members, that was at the Davis Conference Center in Layton, and they had some of our state representatives there, members of staff from Weber County. And I think the goal of the discussion was to kind of talk about development, but I think it was also just to try and have everybody in the room who is a part of the development process. I mean, developers weren't there, but right, it was all the land use authorities, the cities. But my point is there were 2 items that really struck me. So Councilmember Perry Oaks was there, Mayor Tran was there, Shane and I both attended. But there were 2 comments made from other communities, and one was from South Weber, and one of their council members said that, look, you guys are forcing these strategies on us, but we look at this in South Weber and think 22 of the 24 of these don't even work for us. And you're forcing us to select these items. And also you're forcing us to select items that we don't have the staff or we don't have the ability to really implement. And so I think Commissioner Lyon, you're making a very valid point. Some of these I think we could do with not a whole lot of extra effort, but also, I was just saying, we're as busy, our staff, we're as busy as whatever applications we get in. And right now I have 2 mixed-use development applications on my desk that I'm working with. Probably get a 3rd here pretty soon. But there's a lot of time and effort that goes into those. And so when you have these other things that come through, like, oh, we want to amend this code, we want to do this, we want to do that, it gets really limiting to try and fit that in around all of the applications that by law we have to process. The other thing that was pointed out, and to get to your question about LIHTC, and actually this was a comment that Lyle made, that they were working with a group to try and get some type of, I think he mentioned LIHTC specifically, but it came back and their project was scored so low because
We don't have the elements.
no, because they look at the median income of the community. And so, because Farmington is a community that has a higher median income than most of the rest of the state, those funding applications that come through in places that have your lower median incomes are gonna rank higher and score higher and get awarded before we would in Kaysville. And we actually just had this conversation internally, but the county is in charge of the CDBG funds, which is Community Development Block Grant. But that is funding that is allocated on the income level of the project area. And when our median income in Kaysville is $103,000, we're not gonna get a lot of opportunities for that. So, that said, that's something that we could certainly look at implementing, right? To partner, partner with an entity that applies for state or federal funds and tax incentives. Right, if we select that and we go through the process, we've done our job, whether or not we're selected. But just to say that that's gonna be something that's gonna be more challenging for us to realize because we are a more affluent community than, let's say, Clearfield or, some of those maybe more rural communities that don't have
You
the
raised,
median income we have.
you raised Clearfield, they run their own program. They don't get enough money to do housing projects. So,
Clearfield doesn't,
yeah, so it's a catch-22 for them.
sure.
They're a small enough community, but they don't get enough CDBG money to do the housing projects they need. So they want to have their own program, but they're still so small, they don't get enough money to run them.
Because they're below 50,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's one of those catch-22s, but yeah, it is, and we're stuck in that where we have the money, we have fairly affluent communities around. But like Sunset, you got 1 mile by 1 mile, which is the lowest moderate income area in the whole county. And you have a lot of needs in there, but you can't put all your CDBG money into one community.
Yeah, so I think all of this just kind of, at the very least, helps you as a commission understand that this is not as straightforward as the state and the statute is making it out to be, right? But the most important thing is that we select the ones that we feel like are right for us, that will work for us. And then, that goes back to really how I began this off with Commissioner Sunloff and just saying, like, you know what, if the 7 of you feel like one of those opportunities to look at our general fund or to try and create a funding source, if that's what you wanted to recommend to the city council, then let's recommend it to them. And as staff, if the city council approves that, right, then that's our job to figure out a way to make that happen. So I just wanted, I felt like I was very closed-minded that evening, so my apologies to you for that, but this is really what you would like it to be, and that's what we'll take to the city council.
How strict is the state going to be on how we can measure our progress? Is it pie in the sky, or do they want mathematical ways that we benchmark and measure against the benchmark to show
They're benchmarking.
they're going to be pretty tough on benchmarking and how you measure it? So we got to pick things we can measure.
We can do, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and again, you know, I think these easy ones, like rezone, well, if we don't get any rezone applications in the next year, easy, we met it. We didn't, you know, but we get 10 rezone applications and 10 are denied. We didn't do our jobs. I wish I had a better idea of how the reporting and the compliance monitoring will go. I just don't, and unfortunately, you know, like Steve just mentioned, like they hire, I mean, Bill started in July? June or July. The staff that they hired to implement and do all of this is leaving. And so I don't know if they've hired a replacement for him. There's somebody named Abby that they said, I don't know if she was there before, but I don't know if she'll be interim, if she'll be, but they're just building this themselves, you know? So I think they're saying really, like, we don't even know. And then to answer the question, like, well, how's Wasatch Front gonna grade the applications? How's UDOT going to? Last I heard is they didn't know either. They're trying to be as, I think, responsive and reactionary to state code that was handed to them as well.
And I'll go back, I mean, this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we had a visit from 2 state legislators who came to the county I was in with 2 other planners, County Planners Summit and Weber, and they basically said, what do you think about this idea? It's similar to where we're at. And if you don't do this, we're going to take away your B and C road funds. And we were like, don't go down that road, but yet here we are now on a scoring system where that's going to happen. I don't think carrot and stick approach works.
Well, they really tried to push that. I don't even think it was this last session, but in last year's session, they really tried to say, we'll take away your B and C road funding. And I don't know if it was the pushback at the league or if it was the legalities of having to do that, right? Because it's state statute that sets up how that's already funded. So they not only would have had to change the moderate income housing and the general plan element in LEDMA, but they would have had to figure out, right? I mean, they have to do revisions in the other state statutes that define how those funds are distributed. But, you know, so this countywide meeting, Stuart Adams was there. I think Brad Wilson was there. And yeah, I think he was there too. So there were all 3 commissioners, Davis County commissioners were there. You know, and they did, I think, listen as well to the concerns that a lot of the cities had, which are similar to what we've talked about, right? Like, we don't have the staffing, we don't have the expertise, or we don't have the ability to implement a lot of these. You know, they think they did a great job to give 24 items, but 22 of those items literally don't work for one city. And so then their hands are forced to select 2 that they might not even want to do. You know, it's hard.
And I'll just put it out there, where's the housing authority? That's just my point.
I think there was,
Don't go there.
no,
I'll start swearing.
they had some people that represented, I think, maybe the homeless community or the unsheltered, the unhoused. What do we call them now? The unhoused?
Unhoused.
But all in all, it was a good discussion. I think it was time well spent. And in my many years of, I've been back in Utah since 2009. And this is the first time in 13, 14 years that I've seen an effort made to try and have regional conversations. So at least there's that.
So I would share that I feel like since we had already incorporated these 3 items, theoretically, we should have been working towards them, right? So my thinking and recommendation is that we would stick with those, but I kind of have a question about F, and please correct me because it's been some time since I delved into our most current general plan, but I remember feeling like when we adopted that we had actually become a little bit more liberal in what we were stating about development of higher density and moderate income housing, where we didn't specify that we were going to do it in commercial or mixed use zones near major transit investment corridors. So it almost seems like putting this one back in is somewhat more restrictive, whereas the idea of it is to make it so that we're expanding that. So I guess my question is, did I interpret our current general plan correctly? And are we actually, the current general plan as it stands, is it more beneficial to what the state is actually asking for?
Well,
Would that apply to like that side of Main Street and down by Barnes Park? Because if so, isn't that part of the mixed use and commercial that is reflected in the current general plan? The new general plan?
well, so the current general plan, I think, I don't think the current general plan really meets what the state is expecting it to. So I don't know if that really answers your question. But I think the state is really saying you have to have modern income housing. It needs to be like its own section. It needs to be specific, word for word, of the 3 items or the 5, and then how you're going to make those elements work. And so our general plan has, at the end of each section, right, it has our goals and objectives. And these are not listed anywhere. And I think, so our housing and neighborhood section, which is chapter 4, I think, we have 2 goals. One, it says provide a full range of housing opportunities to meet the economic, lifestyle, and life cycle needs.
Linda, what page?
53, and I could probably open this up and pull it up too. Let me see. So, okay, let's see if I can get, so page 53. And this is all it says.
Pretty general.
Yeah.
Work with the numerous programs available.
Which is okay.
Yeah, so, and again, this is our housing and neighborhood, which our moderate income housing should fit within this chapter, right? But this is all we have. And I know that so for lack of a better term, right, we did a lot of gutting of the general plan draft that landed as kind of that final draft in December. But I did not take out any of the goals and objectives. We didn't modify it. There were a couple that were very redundant and those were eliminated, but this is all there ever was in this section. And, you know, the state's just not gonna call this as adequate. So, but two, right, objective 1.2, that's the same as item E, create or allow for and reduce regulations related to internal or detached accessory dwelling units in residential zones. So I think, I mean, first of all, if I was a betting woman, I would bet that out of the next legislative session, they're gonna tell communities that you have to allow detached ADUs. So we could select that. I think it's coming anyway. We tried that a year ago, right? But then the city council said, well, we don't want to adopt the detached ones. We want to see how these internal ADUs work for a while. And then I did do my annual report to the city council in August. I think at that time we had 5 or 6 total ADUs that have been permitted in the last year. Now, I'm sure there's more than that that exist out there illegally, but we've had 6 come through the process. Yes.
Just
So-
internal, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in the last
No
year.
external.
Correct, because we don't allow them.
We still aren't allowing it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so part of the, and I wasn't here, but I watched the meeting on YouTube, but part of the justification for only approving that one section, or to only approve the internal ones, was to see how that impacts the city. And I think it's pretty reasonable to say after a year, when 6 have come through, you know, having internal ADUs isn't gonna substantially change the face of the city. I don't think detached ones will either, especially with how much building costs are. But that said, we could work towards, you know, breathing life into that other portion of the zoning ordinance that was pitched to the council last year and see if they would want to adopt the detached ADUs. And if that's something the commission's interested in, then I think that we should select item E as, you know, an element to incorporate in. And then I would go back and look at this objective 1.2, and I would word it exactly as the state has it. And then we would have, like some of the other chapters, like they have the goals, the objectives, but then they have implementation measures. And so one of the implementation measures would be amend the code to allow for detached ADUs. And hopefully that's something that would go through. And if it didn't, then the state would come back and say, hey, you selected this, and then you haven't achieved it.
It sounds like low-lying fruit for me, the ADUs. And another comment, I agree with Steve says and the chair said about keeping our list down to 3. The more I think about it, let's pick the 3 that we think can have the best impact, that we can benchmark and measure, and then do a really good job executing it. Instead of getting too big a list that we just lose interest because we get too much we're trying to do. So I do like keeping it more succinct, and I do like the ADU because I think that's a low-lying fruit that a lot of people could do for young marrieds or parents that need a place that the kids can help them. So I think there's a lot of reasons why the ADU makes a lot of sense, both inside and outside. But I like your list of all 3 you've got right now too.
Can I ask a question on the rationale for 3 instead of 5? And this is to either Jared, anybody who's thinking that direction. And Melinda, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is if we go with 3 instead of 5, then we are not able to qualify for incentives, which is priority consideration for funding from UDOT, from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, maybe other agency or sources of funding. So I guess maybe what I'm asking is, convince me why sticking with 3 and being laser focused on 3 is more important than going with 5, which qualifies us for priority consideration from funding sources.
It's the KISS principle, keep it
Yeah.
simple, stupid.
Yeah, I
So you
guess-
don't, but what I'm saying is I get the simple part, but that just takes funding off the table, or possibilities of funding, and I guess what I'm saying is
Well,
why
hold on.
why is the simple part more important than
But
funding?
3's the minimum we have to do. 5's the overachiever.
Well, again, Melinda, correct me if I'm wrong, as I read section 10-9A 4085, which is on page 10 of the statutory packet we got, 5 is what allows us to qualify for priority consideration for funding. 3 meets the minimum, but we do not, even if we hit 3 out of the ballpark, in terms of implementation, because we have kept it simple and focused on those, we still don't get the ability for funding, for priority consideration from funding of those sources. I guess maybe, correct me if I'm wrong first, and then if that's the case, you know, why wouldn't we want to go for funding, I guess is what I'm saying.
So that is my understanding, is that, and so how most of these funding applications work, and then let me go back to the whole reason why we even have a new general plan, is because we got, I think it was TLC funds from Wasatch Front. So the $90,000 that initially we paid for the general plan actually came through Wasatch Front. You apply for a grant, they usually have some type of a scoring system. There may be instances where, right, like maybe you get 2 additional points for having items, more items selected than just the 3. That may be enough to push you up over the edge based on other elements of your plan. It may not be, and that's just something we wouldn't be able to know at this point. But yes, my understanding is that the state will limit our ability to have the highest scores if we don't have 5 selected. So it's trying to be a carrot, but it's also kind of whacking us with a stick at the same time. Now, I do have in front of me the draft plan for Bluffdale City. They're selecting 5. I don't know anyone else, I haven't looked or asked, but, you know, Bluffdale's a very small community. They're choosing the route to go 5.
But they also have public track station runs through them, or not, they also have fixed guided way public transit station. They have B, they have 4B, or 5B.
So the 4 that, or the 5 that they selected, I don't think they have their station yet, do they?
It's on the planning, so
Okay.
they're gonna have to do 6 To
At
make-
some point they will.
to maintain. So that's, I think that's why they're doing that, is they are in that, they're running towards that, because they are getting that railway.
Yeah, it's just not there yet. But so they've selected create or allow for reduced regulations related to internal or detached ADUs, zone or rezone for higher density. They're selecting, and again, this is a draft plan, I don't know if they've adopted it, but demonstrate the utilization of a moderate income housing set aside. So they must have a community reinvestment area or an RDA project area that creates, or that has the housing fund set aside, that they can use that. We don't have that. We do have a project area where the Smiths was, but there was never anticipated any housing to be created, so it doesn't it's not creating any funding for housing.
But it doesn't have to be for that area, it's for the whole city.
Right, but that project area doesn't generate any,
Oh,
so,
because I've created project areas and it's supposed to generate a percentage off for the entire municipality.
yeah, and my understanding is that it doesn't generate any housing
Thank you, Stuart.
funding. I wasn't here when it was created, but my understanding is that it doesn't create
It was
any.
probably pre-2017 also.
It was 2013, I think.
Everything past 2017 is mandated to generate 10%.
10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that 10% can be used anywhere.
Yeah.
So clearly Bluffdale has that.
So let me ask
We
you,
don't.
let me ask you on that. Would that be an option for the city to redo the CRA over the downtown area and redesignate it for the 10%?
So we are working on
Because that'd be
taking that to.
that'd be low-hanging fruit.
Yes, and we are working on a project area. We've had some initial meetings with the county, and it would be essentially the city center as defined, and then 200 North. And that, if it gets approved and goes through over the lifetime, with the numbers that we've set aside, and it's kind of complicated, but it would generate maybe about $500,000 for housing over 15 years.
Better to kick in the pants.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but
So we could put that one down. I mean, to your point, Commissioner Sundloff, I agree. I'm just thinking, A, burden on staff, and B, how much do we really want to get into this? But also, what's our low-hanging fruit? If the city's already going with a CRA, that's an easy one to designate because we're already low-hanging fruit on that one. So you could do one that was going to generate create a fund. So if we're already in that process for a community reinvestment area, so you could create a fund. So that could be number 4. We just got to do 5.
Yeah, I mean, I guess here's my case for 5. I agree with those 3 that are on the screen. So that's 3 right there. And there's a couple others that I'll talk about. But here's why I think practically speaking, here's why I think we should do 5 that would then qualify us for priority consideration for funds from places, from agencies like I already mentioned, and let's say Wasatch Front Regional Council is another one. So there are strategies, or there are goals in our general plan that we just passed that are going to need funding. I can't quote chapter and verse, but I think we talked about trail systems, or maybe improvements for pedestrian or vehicular access across I-15 except for 200 North, so Burton Lane, or further north where we identified a connection from Mutton Hollow area over to the business park. Like, we had some sort of connection going across I-15 there, if I recall. I could be wrong. But those types of things, maybe future improvements to 200 North when that becomes more of a corridor, between a higher arterial corridor between the West Davis corridor and 89. It becomes even more heavily traveled than it is now. We're going to want improvements to that. Additional improvements to Main Street here in the old part, or up near, the improvement areas that kind of the land use map identified on the general plan north of 200 North. There's a whole lot of areas where we would be looking for sources of funding, like Wasatch Front Regional Council or UDOT or other agencies. And why not allow us to put our best foot forward for funding and just add in 2 more strategies? So those three that are on the screen, and then I would say possibly J, which is implement zoning incentives for moderate income units and new developments. Melinda gave a great example of how that could look, practically speaking. That's I think, an easy one. And then possibly R, which is eliminate impact fees for any accessory dwelling unit that is not an internal accessory dwelling unit. And, you know, I can totally respect the concern for eliminating impact fees, because that just means the money's gonna probably have to come from somewhere else in the budget. I get that. But in this one, I think it's a small risk, because Melinda already said that internal accessory dwelling units were only 6. If we allow accessory dwelling units that are not attached, that are, you know, detached, except ADUs, accessory dwelling units that are detached, and we say no impact fees for those, hypothetically, and instead of 6 citywide, the next year there's 20 or 15 or something. Now we've eliminated impact fees for all those. I get that. The funds would have to come from somewhere else, but that's a relatively small number, I guess. And 15 or 20 might be on the high end. And so I think R could be a possible 5th option. There's a few others that I could talk about, but even U possibly, that seems like an easy one. A moderate income housing project for 55 or older. So I think the benefits of adding 5 outweigh the potential drawbacks of complicating things, not keeping it simple, and they also outweigh the loss of funding we might suffer.
I will just say, as a point of clarification, let's see, R. So we don't, so this is speaking to external ADUs, which we don't allow. And since we don't allow them, we don't charge an impact fee because we don't allow them.
I guess, yeah, I get that, but what I think what I was thinking about, and maybe we'd have to add in, if we're adding in E, that would work in conjunction with E. So it's saying we don't currently allow for them, but then that's easy for us to say, hey, look, state, we didn't allow for them.
And we're not charging an impact fee.
Well, no, we didn't allow.
No, we didn't allow, we're allowing them, and now we're not charging an impact fee.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
sorry.
And maybe the state preempts us by requiring us to allow them next year or something, but at least in the interim, we could, adding in E and R could kind of accomplish the same purpose or the same goal, but be accomplishing 2 requirements.
My recommendation aligns quite a bit with Commissioner Sunloft's, but just a question to staff with J. Am I understanding correctly that it's basically you establish the conditions in which you would provide an incentive, and then those just become a guide, right? That there's some work on the front end, but it won't add a lot after those are established. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, so, and yes. So once you get that ordinance in place and that amendment, whatever that, the regulations are that's defined, you meet these criteria, you get this. Then it's just the same work as we
Would
go through
currently
with
do,
every application.
yeah.
Does it meet code? Are they complying with, with all of these items? And it could also be something even, I'm just throwing some items out there, right? But like with our mixed use development that, or code, which we'll be diving back into and amending that anyway. So if we were to select this, easy enough to incorporate those in the changes that we'll be bringing back to you. But right now we have a requirement, like a percentage of the project has to be this, has to be that. So perhaps we say, look, if you're right now we require in the general commercial mixed-use overlay, you have to have at least 50% of your project be commercial. That's kind of hard to do right now. Commercial retail took a big hit with COVID. And so we could, again, add in, look, you'll only have to do 40% if you include 10% of your housing units as moderate income. And so they reduce that commercial footage or square footage requirement of the project and get the added assurance that their project will, right? The thing with the mixed use right now is that the housing shortage throughout the entire state is such that the sure bet to have any project pencil out and work is residential. And so, but the commercial is a lot more uncertain as to whether or not can they find the right tenants. Will they be able to have, you know, occupancy in that building? And so that would be another example, right, of how you could easily implement some, I mean, it says zoning incentives, says new developments, so it's not something we go back and retroactively do, right? But, I mean, I've even thought maybe we need to have an R16 zone, 6,000 square foot lots, but you can only get those if they're going to be moderate income. You know, I mean, that's a super simple text amendment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Given that, I would also push for 5.
Maybe
Instead of
I
3.
would just maybe offer a compromise. So I would maybe like say that allow our elected officials to make the determination if it's worth it to go for the priority funding, but to say that our recommendation is to at least, at a minimum, do A, E, and F, and then if they want to go for the priority funding, give them some additional recommendations of the ones we think would be good to do.
My question around, I mean, I think we all would agree that ideally we want to be able to qualify for a priority consideration for funding sources. My question is, it appears that the state is attempting to dangle a carrot. Like normally when you're given a goal or an objective, you know the rules to the game. They've kind of given us what they want us to comply, but they have not, and maybe I'm wrong, but like we don't know like percentage that actually get approved. We don't know how many cities will even qualify. We don't know even if we do the 5 based on the median income, if we'll even be up to getting the incentive or incentives. We don't even, they haven't quantified or qualified what that may or may not look like. So I get the point that, yeah, we don't want to, you know, shoot ourselves in the foot and not qualify, but I guess the margin of diminishing return of adding those as extra too when we haven't been given a strategy around or even a outcome of what that might look like, it just seems a little bit nebulous. So I'm wondering from the state end, are they going to offer clarity, or is there even a certain number of funding? Do we know how many, like, at large, like what that, so it's just this nebulous carrot they're dangling?
Any state funding, which, right, I mean, we apply for funding for recreation programs or for parks or for trail development. I mean, I'm most familiar with, right, the funding that comes through Wasatch Front for
Active transportation.
for all of their transportation, and then the UDOT funds. But there's, you know, there's a lot of other funding sources that come through the state as well that aren't tied to just transportation and planning. I'm just not that familiar, but what we have been told is any state funding.
Okay, then I think it would behoove us for sure to do the 5, because otherwise we're going to opt out a possibility of missing out on something we have no idea we might qualify for. So at least if we get denied, we've at least done our due diligence in trying to attempt to comply. But it would be helpful if the state could give us an idea of, you know.
I don't think they know.
Yeah, and I think, again, a year from now, I think we'll have a much better idea of how it's going to function, how it's going to impact we just don't have that clarity right now, and you're absolutely correct in saying it's pretty nebulous. For the benefit of people that haven't been on the planning commission since this really started back in 2017, 2016. So this has been something that the state legislature has been pushing for several years, almost a decade now. And I think we've seen the evolution of it. It's initially they said, look, we're going to ask you to do these things, and we're going to ask you nicely. And then they came back, and I think I might have said this at one of our previous meetings, right? But then they came back and they said, okay, we've asked you, some of you did it, some of you didn't. They went through this whole compliance check, like in 2019, what cities actually did it. There were a few cities out there that just said, you know what, forget you, we're not going to do it. They went through that, and then they, I think, have seen the fallacy of how the code that they passed really doesn't accomplish what they would like it to accomplish. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Some of that is just simply that we're a city, we don't develop land. We set regulations and we process applications. So I think that they're trying in some aspects to be responsive to the pushback that we as local governments have gone back to them, and we work with the League of Cities and say, like, look, this doesn't work. And here's why. But I think, and I think most people would agree with this, that the state legislature is also growing a little tired of the pushback and tired of not having significant progress made, even though, again, there's only one city in the state that actually develops housing, that's Park City. And they do that for their workforce because otherwise they wouldn't be able to find any employees. Apart from that, the other 250 cities and towns, we don't do this. But at the same time, the state's saying, well, you're still not doing enough, and you're listening too much to your residents, and you're not passing the zone changes because we have a council chambers full of people that are against it. So the council says no, but then the state's saying, well, we want you to say yes, even though your community says no. So all of that to just say that I think there's this escalation of events, right? Like, we're going to ask you nicely. Now we're going to ask you. And now last year again, or 2 years ago, they came out and they told us, you're going to have to do internal ADUs, period. You don't get a choice. We had to fight long and hard with the league and with the legislature to allow them to even give us the opportunity to require parking and the other couple of things that we were able to require for that. I think the next steps, right, they've threatened all along that they're going to come in and take away our ability to have single-family zoning. I think some of the next steps, again, will be some of that lower hanging fruit. Maybe they'll come in and say, all right, now you have to allow detached ADUs on any lot that's over a 1/3 acre. I don't know what they would come up with, but my sense is that in the next 3 or 4 years, if they don't feel like cities are responsive to what they're telling us to do, they'll start coming down with more and more regulations that impede our ability to be the community that we want to be, right? One of those would be, you can't have anything required to be a 1/2 acre for a single family. Like, the minimum you could require would be a 1/4 acre. I don't know what they would do, how they would accomplish that, but they've been threatening for several years that that's what's next if we don't comply.
Turn us into Oregon.
Or California or Arizona or whatever.
Arizona's not bad. It's California. Getting that, it's mostly like Oregon, where they force the zoning, and once you're zoned in your central, then you can start doing your external, but in your core areas. But you have a state central planning board that does all your planning, and that's where you go to. And a friend of mine was a city manager up there, and you have to annex it if like a home on your fringe wants to annex in, you have to annex them in and then provide services to them. So you have islands out to these little areas. I mean, it gets really complex.
Linda, can I ask a question about N, as that is on the list of, from the staff's potential recommendation? That one seems like it could become very expensive. As we talked about R, and I just don't, I guess I don't have a concept of what the financial impact of like those two different ones. So I'm curious how you view this one as feasible and R less feasible.
Okay, so this is something that, again, based on Commissioner Sunloff's recommendations, because I do think about this stuff sometimes outside of 8 to 5, but,
Or 8:45.
right, or, yeah, 8:46. So, I mean, I thought, okay, how could we accomplish that? And it could be a number of ways. So to answer your question, could it get expensive? Sure, it could. There's been other cities that have done it. I think South Jordan has a program to provide a certain amount for their employees. I think it was like $25,000. They may be using that affordable housing funding that they're getting from their community reinvestment areas. So that would be one.
Weber County just enacted that also.
Okay, so that would be one way to, so those new project areas that the redevelopment agency creates, by law, 10% affordable housing. And you could specify then, right, like, to me, I think that's a great way to put that affordable housing money to use, because you're benefiting your employees. This might be a news flash for some, but most people that work in local government don't make the wages that people that work in the private sector. Our police, our fire, right, our line workers in our public works, our counter staff, right? They don't make a whole lot of money, and so it can be very difficult for them to be able to live within the community that they work for. So that brings opportunities for our employees. We know we're getting residents here that we would like to have. How you fund that could be a challenge though, right? So if we have that dedicated funding source, has to be used for affordable housing. I think that's how other cities have set it up. But again, I've even thought, where could we find some funding? And we do take in money for building permits, and perhaps we just say, all right, we dedicate a portion of the building permit funding that goes to that. You know, how we would accomplish that, I don't know, but if it was something that was selected, again, that would be staff's job to implement. And you'd have to structure that program, right? So first come, first served. Once we've allocated however much, we're done for that year, whatever. And then you'd also have to have some type of a deed restriction, right? They need to live in the house for 5 years or whatever. But that's how a lot of these programs work for, you know, like the HUD homes. Or in Murray, I worked with a group called NeighborWorks, and they would have revolving loan funds for affordable housing. You know, if there was a roof that needed to be replaced and you meet these income requirements. But as part of that, right, you're agreeing to loan terms, and you're having then kind of a lien that's recorded against your property that says, okay, well, you know, if we give you this $25,000 down payment assistance and then you sell your house a year later, you have to pay us the $25,000 back. At year 2, you only have to pay the $20,000. At year 3, it's, you know, so there's ways to structure that. So it's doable,
Yeah.
but also, you know, complicated, because we would have to find some type of a funding source.
The other one in there was partnering with other municipal organizations. So like the mosquito abatement district that has property or somebody else and offering up property. I mean, that's one that other cities have done, like Layton's done it successfully, where they've worked with the high school to build houses and build affordable houses. So they work with Layton High School. They come in, the kids build the house, and then they sell it on a deed restriction.
I did not mean to do that. I meant
So
to.
that's, there's ways to do, there's some innovative ways to build affordable housing. It's how we want to go about it.
And I would just say that I asked the question because I really like, and because of the potential impact and return on investment I think you're giving to the community for the very reasons that you articulated, with the public employees that are essential for the community who can't even afford to live in the community that they work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that goes, for teachers too, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's hard for individuals who are in those service-oriented positions to afford community to live in Kaysville.
Yeah. So that may not be low-hanging fruit, but I really like that one.
Can I make a comment on, I mean, it kind of actually relates to this last discussion, but just to comment on the concern, which I think is a valid one, about, the shortage of staff and overburdening staff. And so just quickly stepping on a soapbox, I guess this is probably more for the council to hear. I think, and this isn't earth-shattering by any means, but I think municipal government has like a few primary functions and roles that they should do and do well. And no one is more important than the other, in my opinion. So like, public safety, emergency services, I think we could all probably agree on that. Infrastructure, public works, that sort of thing, right? Keep the utilities and roads functioning and up to capacity and being maintained. Like I said, not second to either of those, but really kind of as a three-legged stool, if you will, it is the staff function, particularly in my opinion, planning function, that carries out the vision of the city articulated in the general plan. So if there's a concern about staff being overburdened, and we have to, and we should or could add another or one or two or whatever employees to help with that burden, to accomplish that very important task, then I think spending another, $150,000 or whatever it is in the budget for a planning employee to assist Melinda, for example, is an extremely well-spent dollar to accomplish the purposes and the functions of municipal government.
Is that a motion?
So, I mean, how many emergency employees do we have? Rightfully so, we have a lot. How many planning employees do we have, Melinda?
I would argue we're understaffed. No, seriously, because you look at the number of applications the city, because when I worked at the county, I saw the number of applications the city gets in, and you compare it against the other cities up and down the county, we're understaffed for the number of applications we get in the city and for the amount of planning that needs to go outside of that. And I would argue, I mean, that's why I say, are you making a motion? I would argue, yes, we are understaffed for what we need to be doing in this city, for the planning function forward and for the daily routine that goes on. We are understaffed. I would completely say that. Having seen from the 30,000 foot down to the 5,000 foot level, yes, we are as a city.
To answer your question, I mean, we have, I should give you guys the same presentation we gave the city council back in August. But we have, for the planning side, we have all the applications we have to process. We have code enforcement that we have to deal with as well. And then we have all of this stuff that the state gives us every year. And then we're supposed to go back and make all of our ordinance compliance, yada, yada, yada. Dan's full-time, and as the director, right, I mean, I am full-time, so you could say two. But also as the director, I can't spend all of my time doing planning. I have to direct other parts of the department that I, that I oversee. And so probably functionally, we have what, maybe a planner and a half, so 1.5 FTEs. Mindy does the minutes and comes to the meetings. So that's it.
Yeah, and so I think we my proposal or thought would be we have five, we suggest 5 strategies, and if there's a concern that we're understaffed, which it sounds like there is, and I think it's accurate that we are understaffed from a planning perspective, next year or in the very near future, the council thinks about alleviating that burden to accomplish this very important task.
And it's interesting too, and I can send you the links if any of you would be interested in watching, or you can go to the Utah League of Cities and Towns YouTube channel, but they have legislative policy committee meetings that outside of the session they hold about once a month. The session that they had in August I watched, and every single bill that they talked about, everything that was coming out of the interim, out of the committees, every single one, the entire hour and a half was land use. And I came away from that thinking, there's no way. How could any community our size with our type of planning staff keep up with what they're gonna throw at us? And it was short-term rentals, it was ADUs, it was the moderate income housing, it was every topic they discussed was land use. I didn't watch the one from, it was last week, but my guess is that it was still the same, the 8 or 9 topics, and it's all coming out of land use. Another thing we're gonna have to do next year is, I think we have until some point next year to become compliant, but we also have to amend the general plan to include a water conservation element. I'll have to wrap my head around that after the beginning of the year. All that to say, I think every city is probably understaffed, right? We're not alone in that, but it does become more and more challenging when the state comes in and says, hey, here's all of these things that you have to do, and they're essentially unfunded mandates. And part of the feedback that I gave to the state anonymously, although now I'm claiming it for all the world to see, the 2 people that are watching YouTube, which is probably Dan. Hi, Dan. But it would be nice if they also with these things would create a funding source of their own to give technical assistance to small communities. I went to the APA conference. It was great. I learned a lot. I was talking to my friend who's a city manager in Pleasant View. They just lost their planner. She has to be the city manager now and the planner until they can find somebody. They have worse challenges than we do. I don't know how many applications they have, right? But they're just as understaffed, if not more so. And that's part of the challenge with these things, that they come and they write this code, and it's supposed to be a one-size-fits-all, but it's not. And that was also part of the comments that the council member from South Weaver was making. They have one person, and he also kind of serves as the department director. So they have less staffing than we do as well. And so that's then when, Wilf's like, how's your appeal code coming along? Well, we'll get to it when we have a lull, right? We only have 2 fifth Thursdays in a year. Those are a great opportunity for us to try and plug some of these others out. But I think, to go back to the point at hand, I think we could get 5 in here that would be fairly benign once the initial push is done. But they're also asking us within these items to put in like a reasonable time frame to accomplish the task. And so if we say we need two years to do code amendments to get incentives into our code, then we need 2 years. And I think that's probably what I would say to them if that's one that was selected. Because it does just depend on how many applications we have coming in. With the economy going the way it is, with interest rates, we may slow down a little bit. We may have a little bit of a reprieve and be able to accomplish some of these things if there's a little bit of downtime. But obviously, we don't know if that'll happen. So I'd want to try and be realistic in that time frame. Also do one of the maybe under promise, over deliver. So it sounds like we're pretty set with the 3 that I had, the A, E, and F. Is that a pretty good read from the 7 of you? Would you want to then, I mean, I think we've kind of gone a little bit back and forth about do 5, not do 5, or at least give the council the option, if they want to do 5, that we would include 2 more to recommend to them. So I think we're pretty clear on these. I just need the direction from the commission then. Do we want to go forward and plug a couple more in to recommend to the council?
I mean, I'm maybe to say that possibly if we can't come down to 2, maybe just give like suggestions of like take all the ones we like and then to say choose 2, that they want to do. I think they're going to do that anyway. I mean, honestly, that's what's happened in the past. I mean, we've given a list and they come back with and say, we don't want to do that. We'll just do these ones that are on the list. So I think they're going to do that anyway.
So I think J, we've talked a little bit about J. I think that's one that we could reasonably accomplish. M, I don't know where we would find an opportunity for a community land trust.
And if we agree upon E, I mean, R makes sense.
Or, yeah, I think so too. It's a 2 for 1.
Which was the
Impact fees.
impact fees? Okay.
One that also stuck out to me, and Commissioner Sunlaw mentioned this one, was U. In reading this beforehand, I thought that one made sense. My question was the timeline. But Melinda, it sounds like you can create like our own general timeline because it just would be dependent on if someone applied for a moderate income housing project for residents who are disabled or 55 years or older. So that would maybe be at the mercy of the applicant, but I think that's something that could be reasonably achieved if someone applied. And if they didn't apply, the answer would be, well, we didn't get an application.
The doors are open, no applications have come in.
Yeah, well, and let me demonstrate maybe how, if this item was in our general plan, maybe how this may have helped a previous application on Angel Street to have had a
Yes.
different income, or different outcome,
Yeah.
right? So initially, they wanted, that's that 602 South, right? They wanted to do, was it R18? And that failed, but I think, right, had this been on the books, and they said, okay, we want to commit, we really want this to be 55 and older, blah, 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 then we would have, as part of that rezone, entered in some type of a development agreement, brought that in conjunction with the rezone, that would have then said, look, this rezone's approved based on these conditions, and, we could have had, 10 dwelling units in the community that would have been set aside for, or it would have been 12, I can't remember. But that's how that would have played out, right? We would have had a very strong portion of the general plan that would be supportive of a development like that. So,
So with that one, it's not requiring the city to develop that. It can be I read it and was like, how does the city develop? But we could have counted that as, a private developer is helping us meet our general plan by overseeing this project.
yeah, exactly. That's how that would have to play out again, because we're not the park city that to actually develop.
We don't develop.
Right?
Yeah, because it does use that word.
Yeah, so it is kind of
It has
a
to be a partnership.
poor word choice, but it would be. It would have to be like,
It's-
you know, because we don't develop it.
The
but-
city is the redevelopment agency, the developer is the redeveloper. So it's a development agreement between the two.
So it probably would have
So-
been better worded to be
Melinda, what-
approved moderate income housing project for residents who are disabled.
I would suggest B and P as suggestions, because if you do B, P would be a natural fit for that also. Because if you're going to do investment rehabilitation, or in the rehabilitation expansion of infrastructure that facilitates it, you're going to pull that money from your CRA anyway. So P may fit in there also, because if you're going to be upgrading the facilities to handle, let's say you're bringing in multifamily, you have to upgrade your sewer, you would use CRA money to do that. That's what North Salt Lake's done very successfully on that 89 corridor. And they've created a CRA that funds that.
So we go from 3 to 9 or so, huh? With 1.5 FTEs plus Mindy.
Yeah. Go big.
In a city that doesn't like to approve moderate income housing, we support it all the time, and the city council kills it. I mean, how many times have we seen that?
Well, it's fun
It's just how it
because,
is.
because-
Our residents don't want it, so the city council doesn't want it.
well, yeah, and they're not wrong to support their residents, but
The NIMBYs don't want it.
Yeah,
that's very
not in
true.
my backyard.
So, well, and it's interesting too, because as I've been reading through some of this stuff, right, it's like, well, describe the sentiment your community has about this, and I'm like, okay. I'll
Which
describe
part
it.
of the community?
Yeah, but,
Grab your torch and picture.
that's almost in every city I've worked along,
They
in
don't want it.
every city from Provo all the way up to northern Utah, I mean, that's how it is. I mean,
Well, and
And-
it's the people that come,
It's the vocal minority that speak up.
And but also there's some education that has to go along with that. I think some of it is an education piece on the part of the municipality towards why it's needed, how it works, how it affects housing, how it affects land, and why it's needed. I mean, and it's not the projects. We're not building the projects. We're building good product.
I think from my perspective, I would prefer that we settle on a 5, that from the Planning Commission, these are the 5 that we would recommend, recognizing that they could adopt their own, right? And if we were to take the approach of here, we feel good about these 3, and here's a list of additional if you want to go for the 5, then would we rather substitute one of them for that top 3? And the reason I ask, I mean, it just seems like J, for example, is easier to measure than some of those others and to demonstrate success. So if we're going to take the approach of here are our top 3, you choose from the rest, I would propose that we reevaluate the 3. And are those really the right 3 if we're just going to take that approach? Otherwise, I think we should settle on a 5 and say our recommendation as a commission is that we adopt 5, and these are the ones that we suggest.
Are we going to be making a motion with a recommendation, or you're just getting feedback?
So if you want to be as formal to make a motion, I think that we can, but I just need consensus. And then we'll have the real motion, right, when I bring back the actual plan and the language. So I don't know if we really need a motion, but, so it sounds like right now, as far as the 5 we've settled on, or that have been, I think, the most commonly discussed, then AEF, R that goes along with the
E.
ADUs, and then J,
Yeah.
and U was,
We also talked about U and N
we did talk about U.
and N. N would be good at quantifying too.
Yeah.
Seems like a solid 4 are A, E, F, and J.
Yeah, I think so. So we would just need one more. And I do have concern just about R. We say we eliminate impact fees for something we've never charged them for, we've never allowed before. So there's that, but.
Yeah.
Well, E could be the same argument because we have never allowed the detached accessory dwelling unit either.
Right. We have allowed internal, but the state took care of that. The detached, I mean, I think if the council adopts that, then essentially they're saying that they will approve an ordinance that allows them.
Yeah, but I think, at least the way I think
The
through it.
detached, sorry.
The way I think through it is, if someone owns a piece of property and they want to get a building permit for a single-family residence, they come through the front door and they apply, and part of the fee they pay for that permit, correct me if I'm wrong, has like an impact fee component, right? So currently ADUs are not allowed, but in a sense, it's really just, it's another dwelling unit. It's just like a single-family residence is. It's just on a parcel that already has a dwelling unit. So this one's an additional one, so it would have, commensurate fees for the building permit of the ADU, of which a part would be impact fees, but that line item on that permit or those fees requirement is zero.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I'm thinking through, so impact fees, they have a very specific process that you have to go through in state code. You have to essentially figure out how much it would cost for all the projects that you would need to put in place to add the additional services or facilities that are needed to accommodate that impact. And then the council has to adopt that, but in my mind, I'm even thinking I don't know if right now we even have a legal mechanism to charge an impact fee for an ADU unless we just called it another single-family dwelling. I don't even know if we could do that, but it's certainly, it's one that we can recommend. And then it's just all, tied together, and then we're saying we won't charge them, we'll allow them, but we won't charge an impact fee. And I suppose that in the end that we're eliminating a fee, even if we haven't charged it, we're still, we could start charging it, but we're eliminating it.
Yeah, I think if the state, first of all, I don't think the state would second guess it, but if they did, we'd say, look, the policy goal that's trying to be accomplished here is facilitate more ADUs by lowering the cost barrier. So we're just taking the hurdle out from, we just set it on the side of the track and it never came onto the track.
Sure.
It's just not there, yeah.
Sure. So do you want to just go AE plus R, F, and J?
Yes.
Do you have 7 head nods?
My opinion is either we do that or we say AEF with, 4 honorable mentions that the council can choose from.
That would essentially be the idea I put forward before, so.
I like
Yeah.
They're gonna choose anyway, so
They're the
might
ones
as well
that keep
just give
turning
them the
down the
5
requests
we
for
prefer.
higher density housing.
Yeah,
We're asking them to
Let them
bite off
choose.
a
I think
huge
it's
bite here.
Just let them choose what they want to do.
I mean, I agree they're going to choose anyway, but I think our function, our role is have this great discussion we've had, narrow down the ones we really are strong with. In my opinion, say, council, these are the ones we feel strong about. These are the other ones that we feel pretty good about. At least get 5 amongst these 7.
Okay.
And I think that's the important part, is that we're communicating a recommendation between the 3 or the 5. That's my concern. If we say, here are the 3 that we really want, if you want to go 5, here's some others. I think we should have some consensus. Are we recommending 3 or are we recommending 5? And if it is that we're recommending 5 and here's 3 and you choose the other 2, I'm okay with that. But if it's, we really want, 3 and you guys decide if you want 5.
Okay, yeah, and so what I'm hearing then is, I think we've gone a little bit around, but I think we're coming to a place where we'd like to see 5 so that we're eligible for those funding, as long as it's not gonna, right, like, we're not gonna create a good landlord program because that's just not gonna happen. But if we can find some of these that we can accomplish with the staffing that we have, then let's do 5, and then maybe let's give them, here's our 3 that we feel like the ones, here's the 3 for sure, and then here's
Some
4,
strong
and maybe we
recommendations,
just kind of prioritize them in the ones that we would recommend, so that if they don't like the top 2, then they can say, all right, we like the other 2 better, or we like 1 and 3. I don't know. Am I making it too complicated now?
No.
So A, E, F are our top 3, right? And so then we have J and R. And what would be the other 2?
N.
N and U?
N and U.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
MOUSC,
What was that?
MOUSC.
That's too many. Although we could try and spell words.
Got the whole
We
alphabet.
could try and spell words.
And
Okay, so A, E, F, R, J, N, and U.
Yep.
Okay.
at least 5 also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And a footnote in bold to hire more staff in the planning department.
Well, I'll tell them that too, but it'll seem pretty self-serving.
You don't have, just say, at least me or whoever else said it. You don't have, just say, you're just the messenger.
Yes. Well, I will say this, that Wilf said to me within the last month, like, I didn't realize we were the 3rd biggest city in Davis
In the
County.
county.
And we have the smallest planning staff.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, and pretty soon Clearfield and Syracuse will eclipse us with their population. Like, we won't be the 3rd.
When we absorb Farmington and Fruit Heights, we'll be bigger than all them, though.
Fruit Heights won't be bigger than us.
We annex them in.
Oh, when we annex them in.
Plus, when we take Mutton Hollow over with our,
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. This was a good discussion. I'm glad that we finally were able to take the time to get through that. So I will, hopefully, within the next meeting, I'll be able to get a draft, but if not, then that second meeting in October. I'd rather take the time to make sure it's a good draft representative that, would be something we could accomplish versus just trying to meet a deadline. So that brings us then to this one.
Call to the public.
All right. Anybody would like to come up for call to the public and speak? Here's your chance. Okay, looks like there's no takers, so we'll turn the time over to the staff to talk about reports, correspondence, and calendar.
Okay, well, thanks. I know Commissioner Doxey was there. Krista, you were also there on Friday for the APA conference. Hopefully you attended some good sessions.
Can we get the PowerPoints that they were showing us? Is
I
there a
would-
place to download those?
I think they're supposed to, but I've actually checked a couple times for the one on the conditional use permits, but it hasn't
Yeah.
been posted. So, yeah, I think they will.
I want the carrot and stick presentation.
Who did that? It was,
Lyle and Dave.
yeah, that's right. So we will get, Toby will get you registered for that Planners Day with the ULCT. Is there anyone else that wanted to go for that Planners Day, Steve? Okay, we'll get you registered.
That's the Salt Lake one, right?
Yeah, it's at the
And
Salt
I'm already
Palace.
registered, right?
For that one? I don't know if we did. The one day,
One
the
day.
Thursday?
The Thursday. Or
So
I
the
could do
one
Friday,
downtown or the one in Sandy?
too. One in downtown.
Okay, all right. So we'll get the three of you registered for the Planners Day.
Is that the one you sent the email about?
Is that the one in Sandy?
The date?
It's the Salt Lake one.
So it was, I think there was three more actually that I mentioned. Well, the League of Cities, which is in, I think about 2, maybe 3 weeks.
That's the one I want to.
And they have their local, or like their Planners Day. So that's that Thursday. That's at the Salt Palace. And then the Utah Land Use Institute, they have one that's like the end of October. I'm thinking like the 26th or something. And that's the one at the, they call it the Realtor Building in Sandy. It's probably about 100 and, I don't know.
It's 106th.
It's north of there, though. It's in between 98th South. It's probably about.
Right next to Workman's Comp. It's right just below Jordan High.
Okay, it's just north of I think it's just north of the new, it's
Yeah.
probably not even new anymore, but the Hale Center Theater.
Yeah, it's just off 106, about 2 blocks north.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I always get there from 98th South, but I'm coming from, anyway, so we have some time to register for that if that, gets a little closer to your schedule and that's something that'll work. And I think there was another one in November that was in that email that I sent to you. I did want to let the Planning Commission know we did receive 2 appeals based on our last Planning Commission meeting. And we will send those off to an administrative law judge. And we've asked Brent Bateman, the former property rights ombudsman, to serve as our ALJ. He's conducting a conflict check right now, and I don't anticipate that would come back with anything, but he'll be able to do the appeals for us if we need to send him to the second appeal. But the first appeal came in from some of the neighbors that were appealing whether or not the multifamily dwellings were conditional use. Based on the outcome of that, we will then either be done or we will send on the applicant's appeal. He's appealing that there were conditions that were unreasonably applied to the conditional use permit. So
You mean parking? Was it specific enough? Was it the parking?
It was the
'Cause
parking,
I found something in the code that actually supports that, so
the
I
parking?
could show it to you after. Provide for safe circulation of vehicles and pedestrians.
What data would you have used, though, to apply that standard?
Well, if they're arguing that we asked for more parking and fewer, and the proximity to the crosswalk.
What was our parking study done?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
something
it's-
like that traditionally, right, like we would look at, and that was something that I was explaining to somebody earlier today, like we didn't have a traffic impact study done, we didn't have a parking study done that would have showed that it was inadequate. And so wasn't any data to support that. So, but let me know what code section is and I'll look at it, because we can potentially include that in our appeal that we send, or our part of the appeal that we would send to the ALJ. But yeah, it was the parking, it was the loss of a unit, and it was the write-in, write-out.
Right in, right out.
And what was the other one? There was 4. Anyway,
Which without those, I think, at least I would have just said no. So, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, so we'll.
I felt like
we'll-
we were trying to negotiate. No.
Well, but so we'll have some training to do because you really can't deny a conditional use permit.
Okay.
So, I mean, you would have to, like, really one of the only circumstances you could probably deny a conditional use permit is, let's say you didn't have any new water available to serve a development, and so you would say no because we don't have water. Like, you really have to have a good reason, and, you know, we didn't have a traffic study, we didn't have a parking study. So, and that's part of the reason, right, on these bigger developments, you do have those items that are required, so you can mitigate the impacts. But we'll see, like I said, if the ALJ comes back and says, no, you were wrong, it's not a conditional use, then we're done. If he comes back and says, yes, you were right, it is a conditional use, then the neighbors are sad, and then we send on the applicant's appeal. So I don't anticipate we would get an answer back, really. I mean, it'll probably be, I don't know, 30 days maybe. Brent knows this stuff probably better than anybody else in the state that's currently practicing, so he should probably be able to, I don't know his workload, but 2 or 3 weeks, my guess would be he'd be able to review all the matters or all the materials and get a decision back to us, so.
I think some training would be, some specific training on, maybe we say legislative items, administrative items, or whatever, but it would be good for, I think, for us to have a review of what the standard is.
Sure.
That, in this instance, Brent will be applying to the conditions that we impose, and then that can be in our mind, because I think, I'm not certain on this, but I think the standard is what's reasonably debatable. If it's reasonably debatable that there is a reasonably foreseeable detrimental impact, then, and the condition that we are imposing is reasonably debatable, it is reasonably debatable that it addresses that detrimental impact, then it will stand. The conditions will be upheld. But it would be good to actually know what the standard is and what the law is so that we could have that in our mind in the future.
So, yeah, and I absolutely I mean, one of the things I think would be great, right? We get these appeals, we get these opinions back, and we'll go over them with the council, or with the commission, and maybe the council too. But, you know, I think, like, what I learned, and Commissioner Doxey, I think you were in that conditional use permit session as well. Commissioner Peach, did you attend that one, or were you?
I did not, but I had a recap during lunch.
Okay.
And I don't think she'd like that.
We had a healthy
Try to
recap.
come across hard, but.
So it was really, I think, a great session. I learned a lot. Dan was in there too. Dan asked quite a few questions, which was kind of cool to see Dan's little, from across the room, his little brain clicking away and him like following, okay, but wait now, you know, and he was definitely replaying the planning commission meeting from the night before. But I learned new things, and I think really the thing that I learned the most from is that they recommend that you don't have your planning commission make decisions about conditional use permits. You just have them done as an administrative level. And so, again, putting on my list of things to do, but I think working towards having the planning commission out of that role would, and before I would do that too, I would go through the code, and there's, to me, why are we bringing a conditional use permit for farm animals to you? I think we're wasting your time, staff's
permitted
time.
use, yeah.
Right, I mean, And to be fair, right, as far as like staffing, well, if we didn't have to write 7 staff reports for conditional uses that really, we already have in the code prescribed what conditions those uses are allowed, why don't we just move that into permitted use? If you have more than a half acre, you can have 3 horses, but here's the things that you need to do. I think that's a way better use of your time, of staff's time. We're not bringing the members of the public in to have them wait 3 or 4 weeks to have an application processed and approved. So that's, I think, my main takeaway from that is that they recommend you just simplify that and have very few items in your conditional uses. But those items that are in there, you just have staff be the land use authority, I guess, on those items. And, you know, and then again, in my mind, I think like, wow, that'd be great. Maybe we'd only have planning commission meetings once a month, right? And you do subdivisions, rezones, and the planning documents, right? So our general plan, if we have need for a small area plan, you guys do the text amendments. And that's a lot more meaningful than us essentially rubber stamping. Although I do think that we have way too many allowances for how many chickens you can have, but
A lot of chickens.
you know, so I think there's a lot of that we could simplify, and that would to some extent alleviate a burden on staff. But I don't know if that would make the planning commission too sad, and maybe you would recommend denial of a text amendment that would push that to do administratively.
Here, here.
I've seen, over my tenure as a planning commissioner, I've seen several times where we've moved conditional uses to administrative, so the staff took care of it. Every time it made sense. I think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Goats.
Well, there's really, you know, there's really very, and again, going back to like, well, how do you apply the standards? There's really very little we can do if it's not already in code. And by very little, I mean nothing, right? I mean, that's essentially what the Marcy Hill was her last name, maybe, from the ombudsman's office, right? Like, if it's not in your standards, you can't implement it. And then, again, if it is in your standards, like we were talking about the parking, we have a code that prescribes how much parking you have to have for whatever type of development you're putting in. And without any type of data on a parking study or whatever, you know, the outcome then was we required more parking than our code requires. So that means one of 2 things, right? Our code is probably requiring not enough spaces, or I don't know what the other thing would be, but I do think some elements, our parking is under, you know, we're underparked, and specific to that multifamily, but that's the standard that we have, and so that training session essentially was, you're stuck with that. Oops, sorry. On that note.
Rose are pulling.
But it was good. I wish I would have not been as absolutely miserable as I was for those 2 days, because it was in an incredible amount of pain. So I barely made it, but the sessions I did go to were good. So would you, Commissioner Doxey, you want to share anything that you might have learned or anything? And same with you, Commissioner Keach.
Well, like you know, our Wilf, 3 presentations he was in?
Mm-hmm. And Paul Allred was also.
And Paul was in on one.
Mhm.
They represented Kaysville proudly. So it was fun to see them. Wilf is I call him Yoda. I mean, that guy knows more about planning than us. We'll never get close to what that guy's got. We need to listen to what he says. He is highly respected in the state, and they ask him again in these presentations. So we've got a real gem right here in Kaysville. So I appreciate him a lot more after hearing him do some of those presentations.
I'll be his Padawan.
Yeah. I don't know if he'd like to be called Yoda, though. Big ears and stuff.
Just call him a Jedi, that's.
The Jedi. We'll call him Jedi.
Plan or plan not, there is no try. Okay.
But I didn't take that many notes because I was told we could get the PowerPoints. So I'm anxious to get those and kind of review them because there's some really good stuff there.
Yeah, me too. So, I'll keep checking.
Anything else? Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
All right, we're adjourned.
Good discussion.